We need you to step to the side. Step to the side, please.
How are you guys feeling? How'd it go today?
Step to the side, please.
Watch out, watch out, watch your back.
Congratulations to NYU, Chance.
Give us a little
Back
space.
up.
Give us a little space. Give us a little
Yes.
space.
I saw you smile. That's
Step to the side, please.
Give us a little
Watch
space.
out, watch out,
Give us a
watch
little space, please.
We're not doing
Come on, give us a little space.
Have a good evening, guys.
Back up. Back up.
Hey, man, Sean, man, be good, bro.
Justin, man, be good.
Diddy's twin daughters, Jessie and D'Lila, left the courtroom with their heads down, silent, shaken, and visibly disturbed. No cameras captured their tears, but witnesses say they looked heartbroken. And who could blame them? Minutes earlier, they sat in a room where their own father was being accused of orchestrating something so disturbing, so graphic, that seasoned attorneys and courtroom staff struggled to keep their composure. They heard terms like freakoff. They listened to a woman, Cassie Ventura, describe a world filled with coercion, surveillance, control, and humiliation. They weren't just hearing rumors anymore. They were hearing testimony from a woman who had once loved him, from someone who says she was silenced for years, and now the silence is over. What Cassie described on the stand goes beyond anything we've heard in the media. These weren't just wild parties. They were calculated, choreographed, and documented. Diddy wasn't just in the room. According to her, he directed it all. The outfits, the lighting, the pills, the people. This video dives into everything Cassie revealed. The freak-offs, the threats, the control, the violence, and the question that's now haunting the courtroom. Was this music mogul running an empire or a criminal operation? Let's break it all down. It wasn't the prosecutors or the defense that set the tone that day. It was the silence. The second the courtroom doors opened and Cassie Ventura walked in, visibly pregnant and wearing a calm but firm expression, the room shifted. Everyone noticed the way she carried herself, not as someone fragile, but as someone with nothing left to lose. And while all eyes were on her, a quiet, heartbreaking moment unfolded in the corner. Diddy's twin daughters, Jessie and D'Lila, had been present that morning, watching, listening, absorbing every word. But as the allegations took shape and the stories of what had allegedly occurred behind closed doors began to pour out, they couldn't stay. Before Cassie could even finish painting the first layer of her harrowing experience, the two teens stood up and walked out of the courtroom, heads lowered, lips tight, avoiding all eye contact. No one stopped them. No one needed to. The media didn't chase them. The cameras didn't flash. But their silent exit was louder than any headline. These weren't just spectators, they were his children. And for the first time, they were seeing their father not as the glamorous mogul the world adored, but as someone whose darkest secrets were being exposed in agonizing detail. For many watching, that walkout said everything. Because when your own children can't bear to hear what's being said about you, when they remove themselves rather than sit through it, you know the damage runs deeper than just legal consequences. Cassie hadn't even gotten to the most graphic parts yet, and already the emotional ripple was hitting his family directly in the chest. It wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a collapse in real time, one that his daughters, perhaps unknowingly, just marked with their silence. When Cassie used the term freak-off for the first time in court, it wasn't followed by laughter or confusion. It was followed by complete stillness. Even those who thought they'd heard it all didn't see this coming. According to her testimony, these weren't just sex parties. They were entire productions built on Diddy's obsession with control. The word itself may sound cartoonish, but what it described was anything but. Cassie testified that a year into their relationship, Diddy introduced the concept as part of his voyeuristic desires. But these weren't spontaneous acts between consenting adults. They were meticulously planned events where she had little to no say, despite being the centerpiece of it all. She described the way it started. Simple at first, dim lighting, candles, quiet music, but it quickly escalated. Diddy began using professional-grade studio lights. He directed the angle of each act, choreographed transitions like he was producing a scene in a film, and even decided what Cassie and others often choosing outfits she had to purchase from adult shops. These sessions didn't last hours. They spanned entire weekends. 3, sometimes 4 days straight. And it wasn't just about being watched, it was about being shaped, posed, and used to fulfill someone else's fantasy. From the amount of baby oil on her body to the specific expressions on her face, everything had to meet his unspoken standard. According to Cassie, she wasn't a participant. She was a prop, a living, breathing element in a scenario she never wanted to be part of but couldn't escape from. There were no cameras allowed in court, but if there had been, this is the moment they would have captured the first flinch from a juror. It was too specific to be made up, too controlled to be casual, too dark to ignore. It wasn't about kink or consent anymore. It was about power, dominance, and design. And the term freakoff suddenly became one of the most chilling words in the entire trial. Cassie didn't raise her voice once, but her words cut like a knife. In this section of her testimony, she moved beyond describing the bizarre logistics of the freakoffs and began to unravel the deeper layer, the control. According to her, Diddy didn't just orchestrate the events, he engineered her compliance. One of the most disturbing revelations came when she testified that he recorded almost every session. But these weren't keepsakes. These were weapons. She told the jury that he never had to explicitly threaten her. He didn't need to. The implication was always there. If you leave me, if you disobey me, if you speak, these tapes will destroy you. This wasn't just emotional manipulation, it was surveillance as domination. Cassie claimed that Diddy made it clear, even silently, that her every move was under his watch. She described a moment where she tried to voice discomfort, gently suggesting in an email that she didn't want to participate anymore. His reply? "I know you don't want to do it." But that wasn't a discussion. It was a warning, and instead of pushing back, she immediately retracted, backpedaling in the very same email saying, "Oh no, it's not that." That chilling exchange, submitted into evidence, didn't show violence or yelling. It showed control so deep that even when she tried to speak, she muted herself before he ever had to. And it didn't end with threats of humiliation. According to Cassie, Diddy used his wealth and influence as part of the trap. He covered her life, her career, her music, her image. Everything she was building was entangled with his approval. One misstep, and it could all vanish. But it was the videos that loomed the largest. She testified that he kept them stored, curated, and ready. The fear of exposure was a leash, short, invisible, and nearly impossible to break. When she spoke about this in court, there was no exaggeration, no drama, just the cold, precise recounting of what it feels like to be trapped, not by walls, but by silence. A silence held in place by the knowledge that one man could end her with a single upload. As the testimony deepened, the layers of control turned darker and more invasive. Cassie didn't just describe emotional manipulation or threats, she laid out a system of bodily control that blurred the line between consent and coercion. According to her, before many of these freak-offs, Diddy had her take drugs. And it wasn't vague or speculative. She provided specific names: ecstasy, ketamine, GHB, coke, marijuana. She testified that Diddy kept them in a Louis Vuitton medicine bag, and before each session, she would text him asking which pill to take. The messages, shown to the jury, revealed a disturbing dynamic. He wasn't just influencing her decisions, he was literally guiding the chemical state of her body. It went far beyond intoxication. It was programming. She said the drug made her more compliant, more distant from herself, more likely to go through with things she wouldn't otherwise do. And while most people think of addiction or dependency when they hear about drugs and abusive relationships, Cassie's story was about surrender. She wasn't addicted to the substances, she was addicted to surviving. And if the pills made survival easier, she took them. But Diddy's control wasn't limited to the private settings. Cassie testified that even when she wasn't with him, she wasn't free. She claimed he would send security personnel or personal assistants to track her, to make sure she was where he expected her to be. One name she mentioned: Christina Courtroom, a familiar figure in lawsuits surrounding Diddy. These weren't just errand runners. These were enforcers in a silent system. When asked how he kept tabs on her, Cassie calmly replied, "He didn't live far from me. If I went missing, he'd send someone to find me." Inside the freak-offs, his control showed up in lighting cues, outfit choices, and sex choreography. But outside, It followed her. It lived in her phone. It showed up at her door. Every movement Cassie made was potentially reported back to him. She wasn't living a private life. She was operating inside his perimeter. And when you put together the drugs, the surveillance, and the unrelenting psychological pressure, you're not looking at a toxic relationship. You're staring at a system of domination that left no room for escape. This wasn't about two adults navigating a messy relationship. This was about influence, status, and the kind of psychological grip that only someone with extreme power can hold. Cassie was 19 when it began. Diddy was a 36-year-old global mogul with an empire in music, fashion, and media. From the outside, it looked like a fairy tale, an up-and-coming singer discovered and nurtured by a hip-hop legend. But from the inside, according to her testimony, it was something far more disturbing, a slow erosion of agency, masked as mentorship, coded in luxury, and fueled by control. Cassie explained how early on, she was enamored by the lifestyle. Not just the wealth, but the access, the connections, the illusion of being chosen. She signed a 10-album deal with Bad Boy Entertainment, a contract that should have secured her music career and cemented her independence. Instead, she described it as another leash, because everything she did, every track recorded, every photo shoot booked, every stage appearance, was filtered through Diddy's approval. He wasn't just her partner, he was her employer, her gatekeeper, and her identity. The jury heard how this power imbalance crept into every corner of her life. When she wanted space, he bought the building next to hers. When she hesitated to join a freakoff, he reminded her, whether directly or indirectly, who controlled the videos. Even her day-to-day movements were tracked, allegedly through assistance and security. There was no separation between her private life and his public power. And that's what made it so hard to walk away. Because leaving wasn't just about ending a relationship. It was about dismantling the foundation of everything she had become. Cassie admitted in court that she sometimes went along with things simply because she didn't want to lose him, not just emotionally, but professionally. She had seen what happened to other women who challenged men with that level of clout. Their careers evaporated, their names were buried, their stories discredited. The fear wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet, lingering, subtle. And when asked why she stayed, she didn't point to love or denial. She pointed to power. Because in her world, he was the system. And no one walks away from the system without consequences. By the time Cassie reached the most graphic part of her testimony, the courtroom was already tense. But what she described next pushed that tension into disbelief. She recounted, in unflinching detail, acts that blurred the line between dehumanization and spectacle. One of the most disturbing moments came when she explained that during several of these orchestrated freak-offs, she was urinated on, sometimes by Diddy, sometimes by others he allegedly directed to do so. She didn't sugarcoat it. When the prosecutor asked if this was something she wanted, Cassie replied flatly, "No, it was disgusting. I choked. I didn't want anyone to do that." And yet, she did not scream, cry, or plead in the moment. She didn't say no clearly. That, she explained, was part of the paralysis that came from being controlled for so long. It wasn't about the absence of resistance, it was about the presence of fear. According to her, Diddy never needed to use physical force to make her obey. The conditioning had already done its job. She had learned how to stay quiet, how to stay still, how to convince herself that this was temporary. That if she just endured a little longer, he might stop, or change, or care. But what hit the jury hardest wasn't just the shock of what she described, it was the calm with which she described it. No theatrics, no outbursts, just cold, precise memory. And that made it feel even more real. She even admitted to blaming herself at times, questioning why she stayed, why she complied, why she didn't run. That kind of self-awareness doesn't come from someone seeking sympathy. It comes from someone who's spent years unpacking trauma no one believed until now. What stood out wasn't the grotesque nature of the acts. It was the system behind them, the routine, the planning, the way Cassie was expected to participate, endure, and remain silent. This wasn't just abuse, the prosecutors implied. It was a pattern, a calculated cycle designed to strip someone of their boundaries and convince them they had none left. And in that moment, as the courtroom sat frozen in silence, that pattern was finally being broken, one horrifying detail at a time. Just when the courtroom thought it had heard the worst, the prosecution brought out something that wasn't just spoken, it was seen. They introduced a piece of evidence that had once gone viral and then quietly faded from public memory. The 2016 surveillance video of Diddy violently attacking Cassie in a hotel hallway. In the footage, Diddy is seen chasing her down, grabbing her by the back of the head, throwing her to the ground, and kicking her. It wasn't speculation. It wasn't hearsay. It was concrete, undeniable proof of physical violence. The defense didn't even try to deny what the footage showed. In fact, they acknowledged that what happened in that video was, in their words, wrong, inhumane, and horrible. But they argued it didn't prove a criminal enterprise. It didn't. They claimed represent the organized abuse Cassie described through the rest of her testimony. According to them, it was domestic violence, a toxic, private incident that should be treated separately from the charges of sex trafficking and coercion. But to the prosecution, that argument was hollow, because this wasn't a one-time moment of rage. It was the visible tip of an iceberg built on years of silence, control, and domination. Cassie testified that after that assault, she had to hide in a hotel for over a week until her bruises faded. That wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. It was a period of disappearance, a forced retreat from the public eye to conceal the aftermath of what she endured. The prosecution used this point to reinforce a bigger picture. The psychological and emotional terror wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet. It existed in the spaces between freak-offs, in the healing time between beatings, in the lingering fear of what could happen next. And the timing of the video's reappearance in court wasn't lost on anyone. Here was a woman, now pregnant, describing the most humiliating experiences of her life. And just as the defense started to imply she was exaggerating, the screen lit up with undeniable proof of brutality. It didn't matter if it was technically related to the trafficking charge or not. What mattered was that it shattered any illusion of consent or mutual dysfunction. This was not a messy breakup story. This was a woman surviving under the weight of someone who, as shown in that hallway footage, was willing to break her physically just as easily as he broke her emotionally. Up until this point, the trial had centered on Cassie's story. But then, another name surfaced in court, a name that reignited old suspicions and introduced a chilling new layer to the case: Kim Porter. The moment her name was spoken, the courtroom shifted. You could feel it. Because Kim Porter wasn't just another woman in Diddy's past, she was the mother of 3 of his children, and someone who, according to Cassie's testimony, had a deeply complicated relationship with the mogul. Cassie revealed that there had been an overlap. Yes, a romantic overlap between her and Kim while both were connected to Diddy. But what followed that revelation wasn't just gossip or infidelity. It was a veiled suggestion that Kim may have known more than she ever let on. Cassie didn't accuse Diddy of anything directly in relation to Kim's death, but the mere mention of her name and the timing of her passing sent a wave of discomfort through the room. Kim died in 2018 suddenly, from what was ruled as pneumonia. But many, including her ex-partner Al B. Sure, have long questioned that explanation. He's gone on record saying her case should be reopened, that her death didn't make sense, that she had allegedly been preparing to write something that may have exposed a different side of Diddy entirely. And now, with Cassie's testimony placing Kim in the same narrative of control and silencing, the dots began to connect in ways no one expected the trial to go. There's no concrete evidence tying Diddy to Kim's death. No charges, no official investigation into her passing since it occurred, but the suspicion has never truly died. And Cassie, knowingly or not, breathed new life into it. The implication wasn't loud, but it was heavy. What if Kim knew about the freak-offs? What if she experienced similar patterns of control? And what if she wanted to talk? The courtroom couldn't answer those questions, but the seed was planted, and while the defense tried to steer the trial back toward Cassie's credibility, the prosecution let that moment hang. Because sometimes, in court, what's left unsaid is just as powerful as what's said aloud. And with Kim Porter's name back in the headlines, the public began asking something prosecutors never had to. What else has been buried? This is where the courtroom atmosphere changed, not because Cassie's testimony became less intense, but because it became more complicated. The prosecution had painted a clear picture of a woman under extreme control, subjected to humiliation and coercion. But as Cassie kept speaking, the lines began to blur. She admitted that at times, she didn't just participate in the freak-offs. She helped organize them. She found women through Craigslist and escort services. She booked flights. She coordinated logistics across cities like Miami, Ibiza, Los Angeles, and New York. She worked with Diddy's business team to move people as if they were employees. And when the prosecution asked if she had ever enjoyed any of it, Cassie paused. Then said yes, at times, she did, but not for the reasons anyone expected. According to her, the moments she enjoyed weren't about the acts themselves. They were about the proximity to Diddy. She said the only time she felt close to him, emotionally or physically, was during those orchestrated encounters. It was twisted, confusing, and painful. But in her mind, that closeness, no matter how dark the context, felt better than being ignored. That's when she choked up, not when describing the abuse, not when talking about the drugs, but when trying to explain how she confused pain for intimacy. And that confusion, she said, made her complicit in ways she still struggles to process. This raised a critical question for the jury and the public. Was Cassie just a victim, or was she also an accomplice? The defense seized on this immediately, suggesting that her role was more involved, more active, more intentional than the prosecution wanted to admit. They implied that Cassie was rewriting history, shaping her narrative to gain sympathy. But the prosecution pushed back with a different angle, that long-term abuse rewires a person's choices, that someone can be both a participant and a prisoner. That complicity under coercion isn't the same as consent, and that's the nuance most trials fail to capture. Because in the real world, people don't fit neatly into categories. Cassie wasn't asking the jury to see her as flawless, she was asking them to see her as real. A woman who, in her early 20s, was deeply in love with a man who controlled everything around her, and in trying to please him, lost her sense of self. She didn't run, she didn't scream, she adapted. And that adaptation she now sees was its own kind of tragedy. Then came the moment that shifted the energy in the courtroom once again, not because of what had already been said, but because of what still might be revealed. As Cassie's testimony neared its end for the day, the prosecution dropped a bombshell. They had a video. Not just any video, a freak-off video. One of the very recordings Cassie had described in earlier testimony. A recording she claimed Diddy used to control her, to manipulate her, to keep her silent. But now, the roles had reversed. The very thing that once held her hostage was about to become the prosecution's most dangerous weapon. Immediately, the defense moved to block it. They argued it was prejudicial, unnecessary, potentially misleading. They didn't want the jury to see it, and they especially didn't want the media anywhere near it. But prosecutors insisted that the video was essential, not because of the explicit content, but because of what it revealed about control, coercion, and consent. If the video showed Cassie visibly uncomfortable, drugged, or being directed like a performer, then the entire defense collapses. Because suddenly, it wouldn't be Cassie's word against Diddy's. It would be Cassie's story playing in real time. But here's the twist. No one knows what's on the video. Not the jury, not the public, and maybe not even the judge. Yet. There's speculation that it may have been recovered from Cassie's phone, not from a government subpoena. That fact alone has caused the defense to question its chain of custody and motive. Why did she keep it? Why reveal it now? Their suggestion is that Cassie may be weaponizing her own past as revenge, but prosecutors argue something else, that keeping that video was part of her survival, proof, evidence, insurance in a world where her voice meant nothing without it. And this is where the trial teeters on the edge of a cliff. Because if the video gets played, and if it supports Cassie's claims, it could become the most damning evidence yet. It wouldn't just support the narrative of abuse, it would give it a face, a sound, a visual language that no amount of cross-examination could erase. But if the video shows something different, if Cassie appears willing, in control, or even enthusiastic, it could unravel everything she's fought to expose. That's why both sides are fighting so hard. Because in this trial, the truth isn't just spoken. It might be seen. The trial is still in its early stages, but already it feels like a turning point, not just for Diddy, but for how power is interrogated in public. After just a few days on the stand, Cassie has delivered one of the most raw, complex, and emotionally charged testimonies in recent memory. And yet, according to prosecutors, she's not done. She could remain on the stand for several more days, and there's a growing expectation that more names will be dragged into the spotlight. People like David James and Christina Courtroom, names that have surfaced in previous lawsuits, may be called upon to verify what Cassie described. That's critical because her testimony, while harrowing, still needs to be corroborated. The prosecution knows this, the jury knows this. And now, the public is watching closely to see if her words stand alone or get backed by undeniable witness accounts. But the road ahead isn't just about testimony, it's about the strategy each side is about to play. The defense is expected to dig deep into Cassie's past, her emails, her contradictions, her moments of compliance, to frame her not as a victim, but as a willing partner. They want the jury to see her as someone rewriting the past for leverage, revenge, or attention. On the other hand, the prosecution is building a broader picture that this wasn't about one woman's choices, it was about a system of exploitation, a system that Diddy allegedly controlled with money, fear, assistance, cameras, drugs, and contracts. And the more names that get mentioned, the more witnesses called, the harder it will be to dismiss this as a simple toxic relationship. Meanwhile, Diddy sits in silence. Each day he shows up in a sharply tailored suit, flanked by family, legal counsel, and occasionally, celebrities who still stand by him. But the once untouchable icon now finds himself cornered, not by media speculation, but by evidence, memory, and trauma that refuses to fade. His legal team has already hinted at turning the narrative toward love, infidelity, and bitterness. But as the courtroom fills with text messages, surveillance footage, and firsthand accounts, that story begins to collapse under its own weight. And it's not just the courtroom feeling the pressure. The industry is watching. Artists, executives, influencers. Everyone wondering, how many others knew? How many stayed silent? And if Cassie's story is just one thread, what happens when the rest begin to unravel? This trial isn't just about Cassie and Diddy anymore, it's about what happens when a powerful figure loses control of the narrative. For over a decade, stories like this lived in whispers, in rumors, in private messages that never made it to headlines. But now, those whispers are echoing through a courtroom where silence no longer protects anyone. Cassie Ventura, once seen as just another name in Diddy's long list of relationships, has become the center of a storm that's pulling the music industry into uncomfortable territory. And what makes this moment different is not just her testimony, but the sheer detail of it, the structure, the receipts, the quiet calm in which she delivered horror after horror. Whether you believe everything she said or still have questions about parts of it, one thing is clear: she's not alone. Her story includes names, dates, videos, and logistics that simply can't be brushed aside. And that's the part that should terrify Diddy's camp the most. This isn't one woman lashing out. This is one woman unraveling an ecosystem built on silence, secrecy, and power. But the case isn't over. The jury still has gaps to close. More witnesses are likely to come forward. And that freak-off video, if admitted, could shift the entire direction of the trial. Still, even without it, Cassie has already cracked something open. And no matter what verdict the court delivers, the cultural verdict is already forming. Because people are watching, they're listening, and they're connecting dots that have been floating for years. So now we ask, how much more is left to uncover? What stories are still hiding behind the luxury and the legacy? And how long before others, like Cassie, decide that silence is no longer worth keeping? If you're still watching, drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this trial will finally bring accountability, or will it be another Hollywood escape? Hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned.